looking in the mirror and just thinking, I'm just going to have to accept that this is just me. And I was like, I'm going to be stuck like this forever. Things can kind of get brushed under the carpet because they're normal, but they may not be optimal.
Women always crave chocolate on their periods.
Yeah.
Let me tell you one thing, that your cells are not screaming, we need chocolate. Like, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Hello guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mindset Mill podcast. I have the lady here that knows all things ever to exist about female health, contraception, hormones, and let's just say that Soph is an absolute legend in this arena of knowledge, because you're pretty much who I've learned, like, you're the one that I've learned everything from. You have an amazing women's health course, and you also transform the lives of women who are really struggling when it comes to like issues like fertility, not having a clue about what a good period is meant to be, and also getting them a physical result from how they look. How the hell did you end up doing all of that, Soph?
I think it kind of stemmed from my own experience. So when I was younger, I struggled really bad with my skin. I had really bad acne. I lost my period for 2 years. And every time I went to the GP to get answers, I was basically just take the pill, just take the pill, just take this pill. And I did take some pills. I took, antibiotics and Roaccutane, which is a really intense skin medication, like to the point that you have to get your liver checked while you're on it because it's so intense. So I kind of just got to the point where I was like, I just need to do something. So I was so sick of having shit skin. The year before that, I think that I finally did that. I didn't have a period for 2 years. So I was around 16 at that time. So obviously, like, you don't really know that much at that stage. Even though it wasn't then that I got into all this stuff, I think that has always been the driving factor behind why I got into it later on. So when I became a PT and when I started coaching, I started to find that women were having these issues as well as myself, but not getting anywhere with it. It was like you go to the GP and it's like everything's fine, but you feel like shit, but the only option is, here, take this pill that covers every single women's health issue under the sun. So I started looking into it from a more functional, holistic health approach, and basically just going down the rabbit hole of the menstrual cycle, books, mentoring, gut health, blood work, so I think in a nutshell, like the shortest way I can describe it, that's probably how I got into it all.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I had the exact same experience. I have had acne my whole life pretty much, still on and off. I will go through like different bouts of it, particularly around the stage where I am about to start menstruation. It's like, great. Here comes the spotty face. Hopefully the lighting is catching me in a good way today.
Let's hope so.
But I remember 14 years old, I was on the combined pill because my skin was so bad. And of course it cleared up my skin for a good amount of time. And there's me like, I'm going to stay on this forever. So I think probably we're looking at 9 or 10 years that I was on the pill. And this is something where when women move away from contraception, that they'll see so many different side effects and symptoms. And when I came off the combined pill, because I wanted to, see what my body would do naturally, I can literally remember the pain of the cystic acne so deep. I've got pictures of it on my phone, and it was whilst I was at university, and I was absolutely mortified. I couldn't look people in the face. I never went on Accutane, but it's something where I was that close to doing it because I was so embarrassed and mortified about how my face looked.
Same.
And I think people don't understand like the science or the reasoning behind why, firstly, you're recommended to go on the pill to help with acne, but then also why it will flare up when you do obviously remove contraception or change contraception. Yeah.
I think as well, just to touch on that, like I think with skin, the problem is that it's you can't hide it, you know? Whereas like if you're a bit self-conscious about your body, you can hide it. And I've definitely been through that stage as well, but your skin is the first thing that people see when they look at you. And because I've had bad skin for so long, like it's a lot better now, but like you said, it does flare, especially if my diet changes a little bit. If I eat sort of junk food, I will get flare-ups.
Does that mean we're not going for pizza afterwards?
We'll make an exception.
We're coaches who have fun too.
It has to be a sourdough pizza. That's my fave.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. Perfect. Sorted. As long as it's not vegan for me.
Oh, let's not get started on that. Let's not even touch the vegan.
I'm joking. But yeah, like I think because it's on your face, like even makeup couldn't hide it. You could still see it. And I was so self-conscious about it. I genuinely hated it. But I got to a point where I was like, I'm just going to have to accept this because I didn't think I was ever going to fix it. And that was like, I genuinely remember thinking in my head, like looking in the mirror and just thinking, I'm just going to have to accept that this is just me. And I was like, I'm going to be stuck like this forever. And the first thing I notice about people now is their skin, because it's the one thing that I've always struggled with. So when I see people, when I meet people, the skin is the first thing I notice, which is so weird because most people probably be like, that's like the last thing I'd even look at. But when we're talking about like why that is the most recommended option for the skin is because when you're a teenager and as females, we are going through puberty, we're developing mature menstrual cycles. We're not yet ovulating regularly and we're not yet producing the right amount, or I say right, but we're not yet producing the amounts of the hormones that we would have in reproductive years, in peak fertile years. So you're almost going through a natural phase of hormonal imbalance. It's basically like going through the transition to menopause, but the opposite end. So the same thing kind of happens in that stage, but we're coming into fertile years instead of coming out of them. So in that phase of life, we have elevated androgens potentially, a little bit of an imbalance in testosterone. When we are having menstrual cycles, they're still not quite yet mature yet, which means that, like I just said, the hormones are not quite in perfect balance. So that's why a lot of teenagers do have acne. But the problem is that we then go to the GP and your main option is the birth control pill. The issue with the birth control pill, like I just want to make a point that it was made for contraception. It was never meant for fixing anything. It was built for contraception. Now, how do we stop a woman from getting pregnant? We stop her from ovulating. The problem with that is that the whole point of having a menstrual cycle is to ovulate. So if we are stopping a woman from being fertile and using contraception, we're also stopping her from actually having a menstrual cycle altogether. So what a lot of people don't know is that when you are on hormonal contraception, you do not have a natural menstrual cycle. So what does that do? Well, it ceases your natural hormones, which is why your issues resolve when you're on the pill, because we basically just cut the natural hormones off. We don't have a cycle and we replace it with the synthetic hormones from the pill. So yes, it may fix your symptoms temporarily while you're on it, but I don't know if you noticed it when you came off, but you will likely have a flare-up of those symptoms again.
Oh, it was, like 10 times worse than if I hadn't, used the pill to mask it in the first place, because that imbalance is so much more pronounced.
And it was the same with me with Accutane. Like, even though that doesn't stop your cycle, my skin was perfect. I was like, oh my God, I've got perfect skin now. I remember taking a photo and being like, what the hell? This is my skin. A year later, worse than it was before I went on. Straight back like that. And the reason why is because the root cause was never fixed in the first place. So now looking back, I get it, but at the time I didn't, because I was like, these are the things that are meant to fix you. Like, these are the only options I had. I didn't know that there was going to be other options. So yeah, unfortunately, if we are using things like that, it potentially will just return. What was the second question? Sorry, I forgot.
It was about when you come off contraception.
Yes.
So we've basically touched on that.
Okay, yeah.
One thing I'm interested to know is, like, how do you manage your skin now? Because I found what works for myself, even though as an individual I'm still very much so acne prone. Yeah. But how have you found what works for you now to keep your skin in a position where it's not, to the crazy extremes of what you've experienced before? Yeah.
One thing I did actually forget to say just in that little bit before is that the synthetic hormone in the pill, which is progestin, it's the synthetic form of progesterone that we produce naturally. The reason why a lot of women get androgenic symptoms like acne when coming off, or hair loss, is because that synthetic hormone is actually more structurally similar to testosterone than it is to progesterone. So you do get these sort of androgenic symptoms, especially when you come off as well. But with my skin, like exactly like you, I'm still acne prone. I still struggle with flare-ups, and I notice a big difference when I'm not in my normal routine. I will notice that my skin is a little bit worse, but I will be honest, the biggest thing for me was diet. And I think I was in denial for a long time that I was eating well. I was also maybe not as educated, so I guess it wasn't just me thinking that I'm doing okay. I think I just didn't have the knowledge that I do now. So I was kind of eating a lot of processed foods and things like that and just passing it off as okay because it fit my calories. And I know that nutrition's always going to be one of the most controversial topics, but I notice a huge difference. Like when I clean up my diet, and when I did clean up my diet massively, my skin improved probably the best that it had in a long time. So even just getting a couple of treatments, like I see a girl at home who does sort of like a few skin treatments for me. I don't really know what they're called because I just go to her and I'm like, you know what to do, you do it.
This is it, chemical peels.
Yeah.
So again, it's exactly the same with me. Avoiding ideally alcohol, high stress, obviously we can't always avoid stress, but when stress is limited on top of, a nutritious diet, then just to keep it at bay, if I have like buildup of, oil in my pores and then having those chemical peels, it means that over time there's very minimal flare up.
They really help me as well.
So much. But it doesn't get rid of the root cause, which is important for us to say.
It's like both together that makes the biggest difference. Yeah.
Yeah. And will we ever not be acne prone? Who knows?
I'm just like, you know what? This is just me.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where actually I think it's quite nice as I've matured that, I'm happy to not wear makeup on some days. And I'm just like, you know what? Yeah, my face is covered in acne scars, but it's okay because it actually formed a lot of my character.
Yeah.
And yes, okay, it probably would have been easier to not be called pizza face when I was at school.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact now that it's just like one of those things where, we all preach about, stretch marks are your, natural scars of being a woman or, like, what do people call them? Like tiger stripes or whatever.
That's it. Yeah.
Again, acne scars, it's just like whatever. I had lots of spots, but we're all good now.
I also got needling, like skin needling for the acne scars. And although it's a long process, like I think it does help a little bit. But yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's like, for the way that I view it is like, it just kind of forces me to be really mindful of the way that I live in a health perspective. And I think it's really similar to someone who, has IBS or something. Like they probably, even if we do get a much better improvement, they're probably still going to have to be really mindful of what they do because they're prone to that. So I think it's similar for us, really.
100%. I feel you on that. So one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to throw some controversial things at you. And the reason why they're controversial is because they're your own words, but it's you calling people out for bullshit on Instagram.
Let's go.
So I love it because you put it up as like memes. And so to anyone who's watching on either YouTube or Spotify where the video will be, I'll flash up the memes. But otherwise we'll just describe what we're talking about. So this first one is hilarious. Have you ever seen Dick Fresh for men to keep their balls fresh all day? Nope, me neither. And this is in reference to like, what is it, like Femfresh?
Femfresh, yeah.
Femfresh.
You know, when I was writing that, I was like there on my laptop, like laughing at myself. I was like, this is gold.
Why do we need Femfresh but not Dick Fresh?
This is the thing. I think women are way more influence, I guess, is the kind of word that first comes to my mind. So it's like women are way more like worried about, smelling or something not being clean and things like that in a way, whereas I feel like guys don't really give a shit,
If their balls smell, their balls smell. It's just part of being a man. Oh, yeah. Wait, I swear Manscaped does do like some
They actually do, I realize. They actually do, but that's very new. Someone actually sent it to me and they were like, no, there actually is one.
It's happening.
Like, well, I don't think guys should use it either, but the point still stands. Yeah. But it's not in the supermarket shelves. So you go to the supermarket, you've got Femfresh and stuff. And bear in mind, like, I used to use this, and guess what? The time I did use it, I had recurring yeast infections. Stop using it, no more yeast infections. But I used it because I was the same. Like I saw it, and they were sort of saying like balance the pH of your vagina, and stop smelling. And it's like, this is the only wash you should use to clean your vagina. And it's like women are just more worried about having that smell. And it's also like we produce cervical mucus. It's a natural part of being female, and it's a great function of the body. The vagina's self-cleaning, but no one gets told that. They just get told that they need this chemical wash from freaking Tesco to wash their vagina, and that's the only thing that they can use.
It's so true. Like when you know that and when your perspective changes, it's like the vagina cleans itself, just use water. Like you're absolutely
honestly
fine.
The amount of people that were like, oh, what do I use? I was like, literally just water. Like there's nothing wrong with just using water, but people are so used to being told that you need this specific wash that it's like, just using water. You know?
Like, what do you think they did 100 years ago? What do you think they were washing their vaginas with? So just use water. And guess what? If you do have cervical mucus, that's a great sign of health.
Exactly.
Like you're in a good position. Yeah. Like you're going to be ovulating well. Like this is a positive thing. Yeah. Like it's actually hilarious when you get to the stage where you're kind of like looking at what's happening, the discharge, like, and you're kind of like, oh, that's good.
Yeah.
And that's such a healthy mindset to have. Whereas like when it's taboo, like let's say, for instance, growing up, unfortunately, like my mum wasn't present and I just had my dad. So I remember the day that I started my period, I was like, Dad, I started my period. He was like, do you have the stuff that you need? And I was like, yeah. And then he was like, okay, cool. And I was like, there was like these blobs coming out. How big was it? Was it the right color? I was like, what the fuck is going on?
You have no idea. And this is the issue that we don't, like when I lost my period for 2 years, I thought it was the best thing in the world. I honestly was like, this is so good. I don't have to worry about having a period. Don't have to worry about the inconvenience. I was going to school. All my friends were like, you're so lucky you don't have to worry about having a period. And that just tells me, bear in mind, by the age of 16, you've had a period for probably 4-5 years on average. Not everyone, but on average. That just shows me how much young girls do not know anything about their bodies. If there's a group of 16-year-olds that have had periods for 4 or 5 years thinking that that's the best thing in the world. So yeah, it's fairly similar to you. And I think even girls that had mums in their life, like it's still like, oh, you're going to bleed for the next sort of 30 years. Just wear a tampon and, you know, that's it.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. The fact that people, again, are feeling like they need to mask a certain smell, or if there's, a certain type of discharge or whatever, like they don't know what is right, what is not right. Yeah. And this is something that has to change. You know, it really does. So back to the point of Dick Fresh, it's something where what you're trying to do is raise awareness for how perhaps women are being taken slightly more advantage of when it comes to different products regarding female health, whether it's contraception, sanitary products, marketing, now hygiene products, and it's really upsetting. Yeah, the amount of girls that message me replying, oh my God, what? Like, you shouldn't use that. I'm like, no. I'm like, it can cause, bacterial vaginosis and all sorts of things. And they're like, oh, funny you say that because I've actually got that. They're like, oh, I've been struggling with that. You're
I'm like,
diagnosing them through your DMs.
Yeah. I'm like, just get rid of the Femfresh, please. Like, I guarantee it'll probably go away. So yeah, we're all for the water down on the vagina. That's all you need. Right,
water down the vag. That's
your one takeaway from today.
Periods are important, even if you don't want children.
Yes, I love this one. Again, I think it stems from exactly what you mentioned with, just being young, getting a period for the first time, going through your teenage years, and no one really, like, let's talk about sex ed class. Okay, so we learn how to put a condom on a banana, but there are 30-year-old women that don't know that you can only get pregnant in 1 week of your whole cycle. Like, what does that tell me? That tells me that women do not get taught enough about their bodies. Now, there are some people that are like, yeah, but why should that be the school's responsibility? And I'm like, okay, well, maybe we could, help parents understand it more as well, but they were never taught either. So I think a big problem stems from when you're young. Like if they're not growing up saying, hey, having a cycle and having a period's a good thing, it's a good sign of health. It's not only great for having a pregnancy, but obviously if you don't want a pregnancy, we need to be careful. But when we have a menstrual cycle, a natural menstrual cycle, we are producing our estrogen and progesterone, which are our two main sex hormones. Now, they are equivalent of what testosterone is to a male. The way that I always compare this is if a male has low testosterone, that's a problem. Like, they will probably have symptoms like low sex drive, like poor motivation, depression type symptoms, you know, low mood, low drive, even for just general life things, work, you know, maybe poor muscle recovery and muscle growth and things like that. Obviously, fertility will be a big problem as well. The thing is that most people, like, I think know that testosterone for men is a good thing. But for us, it's like, you've got this problem. Just slap a pill on it that suppresses your cycle and come back in 15 years, you'll be fine. Like, that's basically how it's dealt with. Whereas guys, it'll be like, right, why is the testosterone low? We need to do this, you know, let's supplement with natural testosterone. But for us, it's the opposite. It's like, let's just get rid of it altogether and replace it with synthetic hormones. So the way, like, what I'm trying to say with that is that our cycles give us those hormones. Regardless if you want a pregnancy, the hormones are still important for general health as well. Your mood, your drive, your libido, like even physiological aspects like estrogen benefits your bones, muscles, heart, you know, metabolism, skin. So it really is more than just having a baby. Ovulation isn't just about having a baby, but it's how we produce our hormones, and that's what I meant from that post.
100%. It's so interesting that I've noticed, and you probably see it as well with your client base, is that when certain clients will miss a period, one of the first things that they do is they take a pregnancy test. It's like the first thing that they do. And it's like, hold on, there are so many other reasons as to why this might have happened.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that actually they're living in this like chronically stressed state, and their period is, you know, massively delayed. And then guess what? When we finally work on well-being, self-care, bringing down those stresses, their period comes back and they're like, oh, I thought I only missed a period, you know, if I was possibly pregnant.
Yeah.
And that blows my mind. Again, just lack of education.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what it is. It's like, I mean, I wouldn't have this knowledge if I didn't go out on my own and get the knowledge myself. Like, I wouldn't have got it. And I do a lot of webinars for like general population, so other coaches, clients and things like that. And it's great because there are women in their 30s who are telling me, I've just learnt more in the last hour about my body than I have in my whole life. So I really enjoy helping like women who aren't coaches as well, because obviously we, like you mentioned the course at the beginning, but just helping general day-to-day women appreciate their bodies and their physiology and actually how incredible it is, and actually getting knowledge around it. Because it is mental that you sort of come to have a baby, and then that's really the only time that you take notice of it or start to understand it. So yeah, one of my big passions is definitely sort of helping women learn this is what's going on, this is why you don't feel the same all the time, and this is why your body's incredible. So yeah, it's
so interesting as well, even when it comes to, you know, women don't understand their own sex drive. They don't understand how their body works.
That we don't have high libido 24/7.
Yeah, we don't have high libido 24/7. Women, you know, experience more arousal and sexual pleasure when there's emotional connection compared to men, who obviously were put on this earth just to be like, right, let's make babies, let's conquer the world.
Yeah.
Whereas for women, it's completely different in terms of how those hormones interact with the brain.
Yeah.
And it is amazing how much you can understand your health and how much you can understand, you know, even enjoyment of your own sex life, relationships, just from trying to understand hormones.
Yeah. Yeah. The way that I always like say that is that men work on like a 24-hour cycle. So men will have like a peak in testosterone in the morning, and then it will slowly trickle off during the day. And then as they sleep, you know, it'll start to increase again, peak in the morning. And then that's happening every day. For us, it's a monthly cycle. And we have two hormones at play that are happening in that cycle. So we don't just, you know, have this every day. We have more of like this across a month. So the weekly sort of, I guess, cycles. So out of the month, I always sort of phrase it as every week of that month is like a different hormonal profile. And that's why as women or females, we don't feel the same 24/7. We're not robots. Your libido, your energy, your motivation, your mood, like all of that will fluctuate, and that's okay. But people think there's something wrong with them, or they don't understand how to work alongside that. And yeah, I do think that's the biggest difference, is learning that men have a bit more of an ability to just go. You know, that's how they're kind of made. Whereas we have times where we can probably push quite hard, but we also kind of have to recoup and pull back a little bit at certain times as well.
And that takes me on to the the great push of Instagram and all of our fitfluencers telling us that, you know, when it's the time for our luteal phase, we must do yoga, we must do light walking, but when we're, you know, approaching ovulation, we're going to be feeling like queens that are superheroes, and so we should be doing resistance training 5 times a week. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you can judge by my face. my face says everything. It does my head in. Like, it really, really annoys me because I'm like, it's trendy to say that. Like, it really is. It's like, girls, week 1, do yoga. Week 2, do HIIT training. And I'm like, right. First of all, how many people have like 4 different gym memberships? Probably no one. Secondly, I think the general population, I mean, most people are busy. Like, I'm sure you'd agree. Like, all of my clients, one of the main factors is time. You know, whether it's kids, job, family, whatever. Who the hell is going to literally base their workout schedule every single week off of the day of their cycle? There's a difference between changing everything and adapting your routine to where you are in your cycle. And what I mean by that is you don't need to go and worry about doing yoga at certain stages, HIIT training in week 2, weight training in week 3. Like, consistency is the key, as we always say. And I think the best thing that we can do for the general population is help them learn to be consistent, which is what most of them struggle with. How is changing and chopping, I've said that the wrong way around, chopping and changing everything going to help that person? So in my opinion, it's unnecessary. But if you know where you're at in your cycle and you know how you feel, sure, if you get to your period and you really can't face doing your weight training session, but you want to do something slower like yoga, do it. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're just getting to go, all right, day 1 of my period today, can't do that weight training session, really wanted to do that, so I have to go do yoga. Like, no, if you want to go and do it and you can, go do it. It's more so like, how do you feel? Like, for me last week, I was day 1 of my period and I was like, I can't face legs today, I just can't do it. So I was like, I'll just do some cardio. And I felt good after that. You know, I didn't go, oh, well, I have to do it. It was more of a choice. And back to day 2, I was back doing my weight training sessions feeling fine. Whereas if I'd have based it off what the influencers are saying, I would have been like, oh God, I've got another week of yoga before I can get back into my weight training session. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah. And you know what? I've also got that mentality of I will show up and I will do what I can, and my best might look different on a different day. It's actually become a reoccurring theme, I'd say, over the last 3 months, that I show up on day 1 or 2 of my cycle and I feel like the session isn't going to be good because I've got light cramping and I don't necessarily feel comfortable. Movement is medicine. Like, by the time that I've got through that session, I've forgotten that I've got any discomfort, that I've got any pain. Like, afterwards I feel great because I've got that release of endorphins, and I feel so much better than before I went, but I had to drag myself there, which is now why I usually intentionally, when I am menstruating, I'm like, you're going to train because you know that you're going to feel so good afterwards. And I also, as well, I think it's important to note that even the same person, but cycle to cycle, they might still feel different. So like, some cycles, day 1, I might be fine. Other ones, I'm like, oh, really don't want to face that big gym session today. So like, last week just did cardio, felt super good after it. So I'm still a big fan of prioritizing movement in some way. And if it can't be your normal session, or you have to even just adapt your normal session, maybe just reduce the intensity slightly, just get a little bit of walking in, some cardio. Like, it really does help massively. But do you notice yourself that you have weeks of your cycle where you feel so freaking good in the gym? Like, your session is just like bang. They're just like, yeah. Do you know, it's interesting because I wouldn't say I have weeks where I notice particular peaks. It's only really the troughs that I notice.
Okay.
So there are some times, like those sessions, where I feel absolutely incredible, but I can't ever put it down to exactly being the same pattern of where I am in my cycle versus it being other factors. Like, I had a good meal last night, you know, or, you know, sometimes it's difficult because there's so many variables to play into it.
Which is why we can't base the week. You just literally proven the point that we can't base the textbook day, into what we should do, because different factors will influence it. You might feel different, and me and you are going to be different together. So like, you've just mentioned that you don't really notice the peaks. I notice the peaks massively. So like, week 2 for me, like, I'm sociable, I'm like buzzing for the gym, I have like the best sessions. Like, I notice that, whereas you don't really notice that. And it just goes to show that as much as we can look at a textbook cycle and go, this is what it looks like and this is what your hormones are doing, you still have to look at yourself as an individual and how you actually feel, because it will change and it will be different.
Yeah, I love that. It's something where it's one of these questions that I get quite often. I'm sure you do too. Like, oh, my period is coming. How should I change my training? I'm like, just show up and do it anyway.
Yeah, and just adjust it if you need to.
Exactly. This one is one of my favorite ones. Now, because we don't have the picture for this, if anyone's listening, just to give you a bit of context,
I know what it's gonna be.
The picture is Squidward holding a blank scroll with nothing written on it, and the text is, here's a list of all of the ways that the pill will rebalance your hormones, regulate your periods, and fix your PCOS or PMS symptoms.
Yeah, I think we sort of like touched on that one at the start a little bit, but let's dig in. So yeah, like the way that I like to describe this in a nutshell is, as I always say, the pill was made for contraception. That's what its function is. Now, if you're using it for that, fine, and it works for you, that's fine. I don't, like, people always say, oh, like, why are you so anti this? And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm anti women not being told what they're actually going on. So when I lost my period for 2 years, my only option was go on the pill. How does that bring your period back when it stops your natural cycle altogether? That's what does my head in, because I wasn't told that. I was just told, you'll be fine. Just take this and happy days. You'll be good to go for the next 15 years.
One thing that I think is important to just touch on here as well is it's happened a few times now, even with clients who are like 20 years old, where they've had hypothalamic amenorrhea.
That's what I had, yeah.
Yeah, and they've been told to go on HRT. And this is, again, very similar in terms of the context.
Yeah.
But whether it's HRT or whether it's the pill, it's not addressing the underlying issue. And, you know, this is where I came to you with help on one of the clients where I was like, whoa, like this does not sound like the right solution.
Yeah.
And that client obviously didn't understand the knowledge, which is where kind of I asked you to step in and help out a bit more.
Exactly right. And it's kind of similar. Like I think that's normally when they get to a certain amount of years, maybe. I just kind of I just didn't go back to the GP. Like, they kind of cleared me for any more like serious things, which is what I still suggest. And you would have heard me say it on the course. Like, I don't suggest not going to the doctors. Like, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is go with an open mind and don't expect that one person to fix all of your problems. But it's probably still wise to go and get any underlying serious issues ruled out. So exact same with if you've got a period problem, like obviously that meme I said, you know, doesn't fix PMS symptoms, it doesn't fix PCOS. If you have a concern, go and get things checked out, right? Like, underlying issues need to be ruled out. But once you have those ruled out and your only option is the pill, in my opinion, that's where it's like, okay, cool, it's time to take a different approach if you're not happy with that option. Because it's not going to fix it. It can't. Like, how can something regulate your hormones? How can something fix your period, fix your PCOS when it stops your natural hormones altogether? It physically can't do that. And that's my problem, is that no one gets told that. So there's women on the pill that go, oh yeah, I have to be on the pill for my PCOS. I'm like, no, you don't. You don't have to. That's just the only option you were given. If you're happy with that, that's fine. But people think they have to be. And then another example of an issue is that they get told that it fixes it, so they come off the pill to have a baby and realize that they now have to spend the next year or two actually fixing the problem before they can even try and conceive. But they're never told that in the first place, and that's my issue.
The thing is, though, that this lies within the healthcare system. It's not a case of necessarily like individuals doing the wrong thing, because if the healthcare system knew what it was doing, then this wouldn't be the only answer. So let's say, for instance, when it comes to PCOS, the diagnosis being multifaceted, when you say, you know, go and check that there's nothing wrong underlying, but someone who might be going through that process doesn't actually know what bits of evidence they need to ask to be tested for. So if you could delve into that a bit more, I think it gives anyone listening some more context.
This is where it can get a little bit messy, because it's like you kind of like, you do the right thing, you go to the doctors, but often it can be quite a dead end, because you either get referred to the gyno or just the GP itself, and it's like you kind of just get given the pill, or that's really the only option. It's some form of birth control. I've never heard of any other option being given to anyone. So I guess with that, like, blood tests is always going to be a fantastic option, because it tests exactly what's happening at the moment in your body. It gives us a really good insight into what's happening internally. The problem is that when you get the blood test, the GP has ranges that they go off of. The ranges that they use are based off of the average of the population. Now, I don't know about you, but the average of the population isn't really in peak health shape. So, like, to put it nicely,
80% of you listening are not in good health, but it's true.
It's true. Like, most people generally aren't. Like, it's almost now, it's like it's the minority I think it's becoming better, but the minority are, you know, the ones that are into the gym and healthy food and stuff like that. So it's like we're basically just being compared to everyone else. But would you not want to be compared to ranges that are actually showing someone in peak health? Because that's not what they're doing. So then things can kind of get brushed under the carpet because they're normal, but they may not be optimal. So so when I say normal, it means that you don't have a disease. Okay, cool, but that doesn't mean you feel fantastic. That doesn't mean you're in peak health shape. So when we're getting testing done, that's why I kind of say that it's a bit messy, because this is where it's like, okay, you go to the GP, you get your testing, but you could just get brushed off as normal. In my opinion, that's where if you're not satisfied with that, instead of trying to fight a losing battle, which it is, you'll never get the GP to I guess, help you in a different way. Like, people always say to me, like, oh, how can I get my GP to take my endometriosis seriously? I don't want to go on the pill. I want different options. I'm like, you need to seek an alternative option. Like, they're not going to give you that. You're just not going to get that from the medical system. So in that scenario, I would say, you know, the GP would normally run quite a few tests, hopefully. Nowadays, you can also pay to go private. Obviously, it is an expense, but if they don't test everything that you feel is needed, you can go private, and you could get an opinion of someone who works in, you know, like, I guess someone similar to myself who works in that area who can let you know what to test. But they normally will run like a decent amount of tests. Then you could always take that to someone who works in a bit more of the functional health realm to actually get answers. So, like, the reason I say that you don't really get that from the medical system is because the medical system is a disease management system, right? They're looking for disease. You get medicated for it. That's pretty much it. We're taking a bit more of a root cause approach. You go to the GP, you have a 10-minute appointment. You have to give your doctor your life story, everything that's wrong, and then they have to give you advice in that 10, 15-minute time frame. It's just not going to work. It's not going to happen. They don't have the time. And we know that a lot of healthcare systems are, you know, understaffed, overran, things like that. It takes me like an hour and a half. I would actually say longer than that. I'd say closer to 2 hours to talk to the client, get an understanding of their history, what's actually going on, what their concerns are, what's happening, what's been going on the last couple of years, let alone the years before that. And then I have to look through their bloods, and then I have to put together a plan of what we need to do to fix their problems. Like, that's never going to happen in 10 minutes. So that's why I say, like, it's not the doctor's fault. So, like, they're just kind of at the bottom of a hierarchy, really. So it's not their fault. But I also think that as individuals, I think we are lucky in this day that we have other alternatives with health coaches. And I think we also want to take a little bit of responsibility and go, we're probably not really, like, that person has done the basic testing and stuff. If we're not happy with the pill, which is probably the only option you're going to get, like, let's take an alternative approach and not put all your eggs in like that one basket kind of thing.
Absolutely. And it spans not only from female health, but to digestive issues, to thyroid function.
Yeah.
I've been through these cycles again and again with clients where they're coming to me with this strange history and, you know, they've got these symptoms and I'm like, you need to get this checked.
You have Crohn's, don't you?
Colitis, ulcerative colitis, so a form of inflammatory bowel disease, yeah.
So what was the solution that you got given, and have you taken a different approach with that?
Yeah, so initially I got diagnosed very quickly, which is rare because of how acute the onset was for me. But this is one thing where with inflammatory bowel disease, it can take years and years of being misdiagnosed to finally get your diagnosis. But I was put on corticosteroid medication, quite a long course. And then I was given some kind of like anti-inflammatory medication just to take, forever and see if it kept it at bay. Of course, I went through flare-ups and cycles of flare-ups, and that's where I really dug into a lot of research. That's where I spent a lot of time changing my diet, changing my lifestyle, changing all these different factors. And I said I wanted to go off of the medication, which is like the first grade that they have. It gets to the stage where for inflammatory bowel disease, you are having biologics, like as in injecting yourself with biological synthetic biological compounds to try and to keep it at bay. And also very, very harsh immunosuppressants, like medication that when you hear that you're meant to take that, that's a big change for the rest of your life. So I was just like, what can I do? And then eventually was managing things really well with health and lifestyle. I think about 12 months without a flare up, I said, I want to go off the medication. It was that hard to get them to allow me to come off the medication, as in like to give me the stamp of approval, that I had to go through a whole colonoscopy test, even more blood readings, etc. I suppose just to make sure. But it almost felt like they'd put more effort into looking at where I was at when I said I wanted to come off versus what they did to put me on the medication. Does that make sense?
100%.
So it's something that is so complex when it comes to just trying to get a diagnosis and the right amount of evidence for all of these things. And where we were speaking about PCOS and how, the diagnosis of PCOS is very intricate because there's several different things that, are going to account to the diagnosis or the official diagnosis of someone who has PCOS. One of the questions which I thought would be interesting to discuss is, what comes first? Is it PCOS or is it obesity?
That's still, I think that there's still a lot of research to be done in that area. But if we look at the driver of PCOS, I think they used to say 70% of PCOS cases were driven by insulin resistance. Now, insulin resistance can be developed by lifestyle. Not everyone's just born with it. And in fact, unless it's sort of type 1 diabetes, we know that type 2 is lifestyle disease. A lot of chronic diseases these days are lifestyle driven. So it's a great question. And I think it's almost like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? But I still think it's quite an under-researched area. But if we look at the fact that insulin resistance drives PCOS, if you are overweight, your lifestyle isn't quite healthy, your diet's mostly processed foods, minimal protein, there's no exercise. If you've got insulin resistance, then it can definitely lead to irregular periods and those symptoms, which is driven by insulin resistance. So it can definitely drive PCOS if your lifestyle's poor. But at the same time, we also have people where they have lean PCOS, where it's not the overweight or anything, or they aren't overweight, I should say. That came out wrong. But they still can have PCOS and insulin resistance, but not be overweight. So I think it's both. I think there's no one or the other. But it's just we know that if you're super underweight, like comp prep and things like that, when you're going to an extreme, you can lose your cycle and it can affect your cycle and your hormones. It's the exact same, the other end of the spectrum. So I always say it's like a continuum. It's like you've got super, super lean, under eating, overtraining like I was, and what people might go through with comp prep and photo shoot prep and things like that. Then on the other end, you've got the complete opposite: no exercise, poor diet, overweight. It's almost like a range of health. There's no one perfect size, but either end of the extreme will affect your health in one way or another, which will then in turn affect cycles and hormones as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like correlation doesn't mean causation, but there's a correlation for a reason.
That's the best way to describe it. Yeah.
So 1 in 10 women have endometriosis. This is something which I think so many people are naive to, and so many people might even be listening to this like, what is endometriosis?
A lot of people still don't know, really.
Yeah, a lot of people have endometriosis and still don't know. So this is something where I'm interested to have your perspective on how you've seen this develop throughout, you know, your client base as you've been coaching over the years. You know, is it something that you see more and more different cases, and having to educate women on endometriosis a lot more?
Yeah, it's coming up a lot more. Like, I remember, like, I reckon 4 years ago, like, I didn't even know what it was, you know, whereas now it's like almost, I reckon there's at least a minimum of a third of my clients, I reckon, have endo. Maybe slightly less, but it's still quite a lot. You know, if you think of a small group of women, for a third of them to have endo, that's quite a big chunk. So with endo, it's basically where bits of the endometrium, so the uterine lining, grow outside in places other than the uterine lining. So the growths could be on the bowel, on the bladder. I think they said they've started finding it in other areas of the body as well. The problem with endometriosis is it's still a majorly under-researched area. So like, even someone like myself, you know, like, I still don't know absolutely everything to do with it, and I don't claim to be an expert, but from the understanding that I do have, again, it's one of those conditions where it's like, just have the pill and let's get on with it. Whereas actually there's quite a lot of natural supplements, lifestyle factors, dietary changes we can do to help manage it. We can't cure it. We can't just get rid of it, but we can still manage the symptoms quite well. And one thing I posted about a couple of months ago was about endocrine disruptors. And I got, you know, someone in my DMs was like, you know, this is fear mongering, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, look, you've got two ways that you can view this. Like, you either take the education and knowledge and be grateful that you've got it so you can do something about it, or you just ignore it. You view it as fear mongering and you pretend it's not there. The issue is it's still going to be there.
What, for those listening, is an endocrine disruptor?
It's a chemical that basically enters the body and acts as a hormone or disrupts hormones. And it's not just females, it's males as well. Like, it's still a problem for both sexes. The problem isn't like because we've got, I guess, like, you're causing it to happen as such. It's the problem that there's so much in the environment nowadays. So like, a little bit here and there we can't control. You can't get into the mindset of being like, oh my God, everything's bad for me, everything's got chemicals in. You can't get into that mindset because it does. You know, you just have to just be okay with that. But we can make conscious decisions of ways to reduce that where possible. So things might be using organic tampons, for example, because cotton's one of the most heavily sprayed pesticides. One of the most crops with the most pesticides sprayed. And like things like that, you know, or we've got deodorants. We can opt for a natural aluminium-free non-spray deodorant. I think females have it a bit worse because we use more products, makeup, hairspray, dye hair, nails, you know, we use more things than something that guys would. So we are exposed to a lot more of them. And in fact, I do think that is a big problem nowadays for hormonal issues. So not just endometriosis, but general health and also PCOS as well. I really do think we should be mindful of endocrine disruptors and, you know, helping ourselves where we can, because the body is becoming overloaded with toxins. And everyone always says, oh yeah, but your liver, that's why you've got a liver. Okay, yeah, that is why you've got a liver. But
what a great mindset to have.
Exactly.
Let's just fucking blast the liver, see what it can take.
The problem is though, that is the mindset that people have. And it's like, okay, cool, you've got a liver, but you also want your liver to be functioning well. And if we're just slamming it with, you know, toxins, alcohol, you know, poor diet, all that stuff, well, it's probably not going to be detoxing you very well in the first place. So we do still want to help ourselves. And yeah, I really do think that endocrine disruptors is a really important thing that especially endometriosis clients, but everyone should be aware of. And that's why I do want to try and talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, and something that aligns with, you know, whether it's digestive issues, whether it's issues when it comes to female health conditions such as PCOS and endometriosis, is things that raise inflammation. And a lot of people don't, again, really understand this concept of what inflammation is and what causes inflammation. Now, this was obviously a big learning for me when I developed an inflammatory condition. I'll never forget when they did my colonoscopy, and I could see my digestive lining on, like, the lining of my large intestine on the screen, and it literally looked like it was on fire, like ulcered, bleeding, like, and I was like, that is the inside of my body. And I was like, how the hell has this happened? And then I think from being able to visualize inflammation and see what it looked like, I understood so much more as to what I put in my body, how I treat my body, what that actually is doing to my insides. Like, when you can see it, then you're like, oh, okay. But this is something that, again, is not necessarily visible with PCOS or with endometriosis. Or other conditions that are exacerbated by things that will increase inflammatory markers. So when we're talking about, you know, general population, the simple things in their life that they won't think twice about that will increase inflammation, what are those things?
Controversial, but gluten's definitely one of them. And, you know, this is again where it's like on Instagram, it's so, oh no, you're wrong, this person's wrong. And it's basically just becomes a fight instead of a conversation. It's like, let's look at it from a like neutral perspective. Gluten is inflammatory, right? For some people, maybe not everyone, but for some. So it doesn't mean that everyone should just consume it. And it also doesn't mean that everyone should just cut it out. But it's one of those things where it is one of the top inflammatory foods. So things like that, you know, and even if you don't have celiac, you could still be like, gluten could still be affecting you. You don't have to have celiac to be intolerant to gluten or have it affecting you. So that's always one that I would look into. And I guess sometimes there's not obvious symptoms of that. You may not get the bloating. Like for me, you know, my gut wasn't in a great place because of my skin problems. Well, the gut was driving that, but I didn't have any obvious symptoms. I didn't have bloating. I didn't have any cramps after eating. I didn't have IBS symptoms.
You know what's so interesting? I had an ex-partner who actually did have celiac disease, yet he wouldn't get any symptoms if he consumed gluten. So you can imagine the amount of damage that would do to his health. But yet, even if he had been in a situation where some of his food had been contaminated, he wouldn't even know because he didn't produce those symptoms.
Yes.
And that's where actually it's quite fascinating in terms of you're consuming something that does spike inflammation, but you don't know. There's certain things where you kind of do know. For instance, alcohol, processed shit, like that's going to spike inflammation. But it's also the fact that until a lot of people get sick, they don't think about it. Yeah,
dairy for some people can be, you know, highly inflammatory, but not others. So like I'm a big fan of like quality dairy and things like that, you know, and when I say that, I mean it is quite hard to source nowadays. Like a lot of the dairy that we do see in supermarkets isn't as of high quality. A couple of my favorite sources, like I personally wouldn't drink milk unless it was sort of from like a, you know, organic farm or something like that where I knew it was coming from. But I think, you know, like skyr Greek yogurt, I don't even know that's how you pronounce it. Like skyr? Yeah, that one.
You're asking the vegan here.
Yeah.
I don't know.
She knows better than me. But like things like that. But I still think it's important to be like mindful of where your food's coming from. So although like, you know, we both have completely different diets, like I'm still a fan of being like, well, it's still important to be mindful of where your animal products are coming from. It's not just willy-nilly eat whatever the hell you can. It's like, well, actually, is this coming from a farm where the cows are pasture raised and on grass, or is it coming from a, you know, factory or something? So I'm still a massive fan of being aware of that. And like I said, dairy definitely is one of those ones that can be inflammatory. So that's why for some people they will get symptoms. But with gluten, like you said, it can still be damaging your gut, but you might not have obvious symptoms of it. So that's why I say like it's hard, because you may not have direct symptoms. Like people just go, oh, well, gluten doesn't affect me. It's like, okay, but not that you know of. So yeah, that alcohol is obviously, unfortunately, you know, we all know it's bad for us, but I think because it's such a accepted part of society, I think people kind of forget, or they just sort of don't want to sort of come to terms with the fact that it is actually really bad for you.
You know, we'll see it because I live in Dubai. You come to Dubai very often. we know what it's like out there, where it's very different in terms of like the lifestyle, the culture, where it's not a main part of everything that everyone does.
Yeah.
And it's very fascinating where in some cultures, everything is, you know, driven by alcohol, like when it's happy hour, what time the pub opens, like what people are doing.
That's England. That's what I notice when I come to England.
Exactly.
And Australia is the same, but I think because Australia has a bit more of like the both, you don't notice it as much. Like it definitely is, don't get me wrong, but like England is very alcohol driven, and I find that people struggle with the aspect of like, oh, but that's how we all socialize. So it can be a hard one, but I think it's one of those sort of hard conversations you have to have with yourself. Like, what is your priority? Like you, in my opinion, you can still have the best of both worlds. You can still go out with your friends and just choose a non-alcoholic drink. Like, I know that's a big deal for some people, but it's like you can still go out, but you're also just not damaging your health if you are massively affected by it. Otherwise, you know, the way that I like to say it is saying yes to one thing, saying no to another. So if you're saying yes to the alcohol, unfortunately, you are sacrificing your health at the same time. So
let's talk about this in terms of fat loss and focus on health, because, you know, it's a lot of the time something where people think when they're in a fat loss phase that actually they are being more healthy because perhaps they're more focused on certain elements of health. But you've also commented on this where, you know, you're kind of saying that those things are mutually exclusive. So yeah, expand a bit more on in terms of like the dichotomy between fat loss and being healthy.
Yes, I got you. Like, I think what you're trying to say is where I've spoken about, like, we still need to prioritize health alongside fat loss, right? Yeah. So like the one thing that I was a massive promoter of when I first became a personal trainer, and I think the fitness industry was too, that's kind of where I came into it, I think, was if it fits your macros. So the idea behind that was like, well, you can change your body composition, just eat whatever fits your macros. Like you don't need to worry about specific foods. You don't have to cut specific foods out. That's all well and good if you're not affected by certain foods, you know? So in my, like, honestly, I was at my worst health when I was following something like that because I was viewing all foods as the same.
I agree. 100%
you know?
Agree.
And you would know, like you would see so many people say, oh, there's no such thing as good and bad foods. Like it kind of makes me eye roll because it's like, okay, we don't need to view foods like that. But those people also say, well, your body doesn't know the difference between 100 calories of a Snickers and 100 calories of an apple. I'm like, that's like, okay, if you're looking at purely numbers, sure, it's 100 calories, but the quality of the contents are completely different. If you're just viewing food as that all the time, not the odd time of, okay, well, having the odd chocolate bar is not going to kill you. Of course you can have that. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you're viewing your whole diet like that, it's like, oh, well, 500 calories of McDonald's is 500 calories of the meal I could make at home. Like you get into doing that all the time. That's the issue. And that's what I was doing. I was like, oh, well, as long as it fits my calories, like I'm still hitting my macros, so it doesn't matter. I literally wasn't prioritizing nutrient dense quality foods. And as a result of that, my health did suffer. You know, my skin was the worst it's been. I struggled with my weight despite tracking macros. My periods, my PMS was pretty bad. Blood markers weren't great. So your diet does matter. And even if your goal is fat loss, yes, I still get clients to track calories. I still track calories myself if I'm in a deficit, and you probably do as well with clients. But there's a difference between only prioritizing calories and then also prioritizing what your calories are actually made up of. And that's what I'm a big fan of, is actually combining the two, not just like one or the other.
Yeah.
So.
And it can't be argued that when you're in a deficit, you are in a deficit of energy. You are consuming less amount of food, and therefore you've got less opportunity to introduce micronutrients to the body, what the body needs. The other thing from, you know, having done bodybuilding for how many years and then seeing how certain bodybuilders will program their clients, or even what I've been through, it's like, okay, cool, we're going to do a prep. We're going to eat the same foods for 6 months of the year. Because obviously that's going to mean that we can remove any variables of your body fluctuating however. And it's like, okay, but is rice cakes as my main carb source for 6 months actually a healthy thing to do? Like, okay, let's not get into it about bodybuilding isn't healthy at all. But it's very common even with people coaching general population clients where they're given a meal plan.
Yes.
They're given a meal plan with only like, this is your meal 1, this is your meal 2, this is your meal 3, you know, which is completely against the opposite of what we advocate. Even if we are giving someone a meal plan from, you know, a calorie controlled option that they've got, they could probably make, you know, 30 different meal combos from the ingredients on there.
Yeah.
Because biodiversity is so important, you know, you need that nutrient diversity for your gut health, your gut microbiome, all of these things that people are just like, oh, but you're telling me that I probably shouldn't eat 2 bagel thins a day, like every single day?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's one of these things where, again, it's that importance. Yeah. People won't realize it until they realize they're deficient or they're sick with something. Yeah. It's a real tough conversation to have with someone unless they have a reason to value health.
I mean, like, this is probably like a hard conversation that people have to have with themselves as well. But like, you know, it sells. To be able to tell someone that you can eat whatever the hell you want and still get results, it sells because people go, sweet, I don't have to change anything. I can still get results and do exactly what I'm doing now. And it's like, everyone always talks about that diet where someone ate, I think it was Pop-Tarts or something, and they still lost weight. It's like, okay, cool. But like, is your goal to just lose weight, or do you want to actually perform well, feel good, have healthy hormones, have a healthy gut? Like, I think people just look at, like, almost get tunnel vision and look at weight loss, but forget about everything else. And it's like, you can still be skinny and be unhealthy. So why don't we focus on everything altogether? But in the other side of my mind, I'm like, why is it such a controversial thing? Because the better you're eating, the more satiated you're going to be, the less hungry you're going to be, the more nutrients you're going to get and feel better. So when you're in a deficit, isn't that the best option anyway? You know, whereas it's just become so controversial now that I'm like, why? You know, it's like you see the big people on Instagram saying, oh, well, eggs and avocado is the same calories as a Big Mac, so, you know, they're the same. It's like, actually, no. They're
Why don't we ask your gut how it feels about those things being the exact same amount of calories? That was your only diet,
yeah. Yeah.
Here's an example of a quote that I would get from different clients, and it's something that crops up in one way or another. And again, it's very interesting to hear your thoughts on this. Mm-hmm. I came off contraception 3 months ago. I'm continuously bleeding or spotting. I definitely need to go to the doctors to get my hormones tested.
Yeah. So I think you have to give your body time. So when you just come off birth control, you know, the way that the cycle works is that there's a signal from the brain to the ovaries, and that's a communication loop in your body that's happening all of the time. Bear in mind that that's been suppressed for however long that person's been on hormonal birth control for. So I always say to anyone, like, if you're coming off hormonal birth control, give your body time to regulate. I normally say 6 to 12 months. 12 months being the upper end, and like, right, if there's definitely nothing fixed by 12 months, like, it's definitely, there's something going on. We need to look into that and how we can fix that. It's not freak out, there's something majorly wrong with you. It's more so just, let's look into that and how we can fix it. With something like that, testing hormones alone isn't going to solve the problem, because hormones are at the bottom of like a cascade of events in the body. So even if we get the hormones tested, it's almost like, okay, cool, but why are the hormones not right? So it's like, we can have the numbers of the hormones and what they're sitting at, but we have no other information as to why they're sitting like that. So a lot of people will sort of say like, oh, I need to get my hormones tested. But it's like, no, you need to get everything tested, because what's going on in the body is what will impact hormones. It's not hormones impact everything else. It's the other way around. So in that scenario, like, first of all, I would say, like, you know, definitely go and get tested, especially if it's like constant bleeding, because, you know, the GP will do scans and things like that to see what's going on, do all full blood tests and things, but also give your body time, because it depends massively on the person. It depends on the form of birth control, how long they were on it. But if I did have a client with symptoms like that, I would definitely go and get tested, but have everything tested.
It's something where a lot of people feel like there's, you know, one specific thing that has to be the root cause as to why they're experiencing these symptoms. But naturally it's time, and as you say, there's loads of different other health markers that are important to get checked out. So I think that's going to be helpful to anyone who
You've nailed it with that. Like people think it's one thing, but actually it could be multiple things combining together.
What is a normal period meant to feel like?
Good question. Something we haven't spoken about, actually. So a normal period it should be relatively like pain-free. It shouldn't really affect your day-to-day life that much. So people are always shocked when I say that. You know, I think now that I've posted about it so much, I think people are just kind of like, oh yeah, it's Sophie talking about periods again. But when I first posted it, people were like, what do you mean? Like, you know, I've got this, I've got that. Like, I've been told that it's normal, or you're like, that's not true. Like, some people have really bad periods. You're making them feel bad about their, like, blah, blah, blah. The way that I describe it is like, we are not meant to suffer for 25% of the month, every single month, right? Your period is like a monthly report card. And I didn't make that up. I got that quote from Lara Bryden, who's a, you know, amazing woman in the women's health space. But she describes it in the best way possible, because it's like the period that you get is almost like a report card into your internal health. So if your period is really, really bad, you can't function, you've got to take painkillers, you get loads and loads of symptoms, your symptoms last for quite a few days or a week or two, that's almost like a report to say like, hey, there's something going on internally that we really want to look into, because it shouldn't be like that. And people with the mindset of like, that's just normal for women, or that's just how having a period is, that's why endometriosis takes 7 to 12 years to diagnose, because they're told constantly, it's just, you're just unlucky, you just have bad periods. It's like, no, there's actually something going on, but they don't find that because they're constantly told that it's just normal for them. And unfortunately, they're just unlucky and they just have to put up with the pain every single month. So a good period should really look like minimally inconvenient to your life, to be honest with you. It's normal to feel different. And I don't want people to think that I'm saying that you should just feel the same 24/7, because your hormones drop just before you get your period. And when you are on your period, you're in your lowest hormonal state. So, I mean, if we compare that to when our hormones are high, like, we will notice some changes and we will notice some differences. Those differences could be things like feeling a bit more fatigued, needing a bit more downtime. You might not feel as social. You might not feel as like energetic. You might feel that you just feel a bit drained quicker. Like for me, I just noticed that like talking and things like that, or doing calls or social events, just drain me massively at that time in my cycle. So I think it's about, that's kind of, I guess, stemmed back to what we spoke about at the start. Like, it's about understanding what's happening and your individual symptoms and how you feel, understanding that some symptoms are normal, as in a little bit more fatigue, needing to slow down a little bit. You know, you might just feel like you need to just spend a bit more time on your own. You know, things like that are normal. But being in pain, not being able to get out of bed, not being able to go to work, having to sleep all day, like, that's completely different to just feeling a bit more fatigued and less energetic or heightened emotions versus feeling depressed and being on like that complete other end of the scale. The period should also be around 3 to 7 days long. Any shorter or longer than that could be, you know, either low hormones or an imbalance in hormones or other factors that could be contributing to that as well. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's pretty much how I would describe it.
My final question is kind of around the way that people perceive the symptoms associated with their menstrual cycle, or certain things that they might experience. For instance, people expect that they will have cravings for certain things.
Yeah.
People expect that they will be, you know, feeling terrible. And we kind of spoke about that in terms of changing training. But what are your thoughts around certain people having this narrative that they will go through certain things, that they will expect certain things, because society has perpetuated this kind of notion that women always crave chocolate on their periods?
Yeah.
Let me tell you one thing, that your cells are not screaming, we need chocolate. Like, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And it's more so if not entirely psychological, as opposed to it being physical. Yet people love to give into, oh, it's my period, so I ate 17 chocolate bars.
I used to be that person. Like I used to genuinely have super bad binge eating around my period. Like now, yeah, I crave chocolate, but it's not to the point, like the way that I describe it is like, when you can't be like, when you're sat at home and you can't be bothered to go to the shop to get what you need. You're just like, you know what? It's too much effort. I can't be arsed. I'm not even going to bother because it's that one thing you need and you're like, nah, fuck it, can't be bothered. I used to like, my cravings would be so bad that I would drive to the shop just to get like chocolate, Nutella, like everything I was craving because it was that bad, and I would eat it all in one go. So it's like, if you're experiencing something like that definitely isn't normal, which I guess is kind of from the other question. But at the same time, if you do get cravings, there's multiple different reasons for it. But as you mentioned, a big one of it is psychological, because your hormones have dropped at that stage. What do those hormones do? Well, they impact your mood. Estrogen boosts neurotransmitters. So we've almost got a drop in serotonin and dopamine. We might have heightened emotions. So it might be an emotional response. You might be feeling a bit more stressed because we maybe don't deal with stress as well at that time of the cycle. So there's loads of different combining psychological factors that make you want that specific food. Like, why do we crave chocolate instead of, I don't know, like cereal? It's because you get that dopamine hit from the food that's so satisfying. And that's normally one of the biggest foods that people emotionally eat with, right? Is chocolate, because you do get that dopamine hit. So a lot of it is actually psychological, but I would also say like a lot of it can be managed quite well. So it's like, okay, sure, have a little bit of chocolate, but if you're having to binge eat on loads of it, then I would be looking at, are you consuming enough protein? Are you having healthy fats to support your body at that stage? We do tolerate fats a little bit better at that stage of the cycle because we do have a little bit more insulin resistance at that stage, which can also heighten cravings. So it's almost like there's like combining factors coming together. But I also believe that they can be managed quite well, so I believe that we can't just use that as an excuse to be like, oh, I've just eaten like 15 chocolate bars, but it's okay because I'm on my period. It's like, no, like don't justify it. If you've got cravings, like sure, have a little bit of something, but if you need to do more, you need to look at other ways to manage it. And I don't think it can be just an excuse to just binge eat on junk, because that's going to make you feel worse, And a couple of those suggestions would be magnesium. I think that's fantastic for managing cravings, as well as a ton of other PMS symptoms and other health benefits, even apart from just periods. But also looking at your diet. Like if you're already eating junk, you're probably just going to crave that even more. Whereas if you're eating quite well, you can probably manage them quite well with just a little bit of, chocolate here and there.
I think also it even comes down to what people have associated when it comes to the thought patterns from when they've been a child, what they've seen their mum and their sisters do.
Yeah.
If you don't have a female figure in your life that kind of uses, I've got cravings, like you haven't heard that before, then why would you think, it's my period, I'm going to go and eat loads of chocolate, versus, if that's been something that you've grown up with, seeing someone else do that, you almost mimic the behaviors.
Movies, social media, memes, they're always like talking about how like there's like the memes around the period are always like woman with chocolate like on their bed like passed out and stuff,
like ice cream tub, like with a big spoon, like crying into tissues.
Honestly, like it is. So then you just kind of start associating that time with going, I feel a bit sorry for myself, so I deserve this kind of thing. So I think a lot of it is psychological, because we associate those foods with the period. So then you almost like want them because you're like, it's time. It's sort of time to use those foods for comfort at that stage of the cycle. Don't get me wrong, like chocolate buttons, everyone knows that they're my fave and I will definitely have a few, but I used to be at the point where I'd have like a whole bag or two in one go along with other stuff, whereas now I might just have a few and I'm satisfied with my other dietary prioritizing.
Yeah, that's a guaranteed way to fuck up your stomach.
Do you notice a difference? Like obviously I've never competed, so I don't have the first-hand knowledge of what it feels like, but do you notice a difference from then versus now that you've not been doing that with your own hormones and menstrual cycle?
Yeah, it's very, very noticeable now that I've got a regular menstrual cycle, that I know what's coming, I know what I'm expecting. Like, as I say, it's such a important sign of health that I took for granted that I didn't even pay attention to previously. So like now when I kind of feel like the dip in my luteal phase, I'm like, okay, period's coming.
Yeah.
And then like when my period does arrive, like for me as well, it's so nice just being in tune with my body. Like I always get cramps during ovulation, and now I know that's because it is ovulation, or it's what's happening there. Whereas before, I just had no idea what was going on. I'd have like a period every so often. I'd have spotting every so often. Sometimes I'd feel low, but I didn't know why. I couldn't understand my body. Like, as you say, your period is like your report card for what's going on. Actually having a regular cycle helps me to understand maybe why I was responding in a certain way to certain things. Like recovery is better, mood is better, productivity, libido, all of these things are massively improved. So the fact is, like, when you do go into a bodybuilding prep or get very, very lean for whatever reason, it's not just that you'll lose your menstrual cycle during that time. It's that it takes a long time for it to regulate and come back. A prep which is 6 months, in terms of actually regaining a regular cycle, you could be looking at another 6, 9, 12 months. I know several competitors who have never got their cycle back. And that's fucking scary.
It's pretty mad, isn't it? And I think as well, like, I mean, I've never been into like the bodybuilding stuff. I can appreciate, like, especially I think the more I had friends that were doing it, I could appreciate watching them work hard for what they wanted. I think that's where I kind of developed a bit more respect for it, because like someone like yourself, obviously you're my friend, and watching you do something that you wanted to do, like for me, that was like, oh, she's achieving what she wants. Like, that's where I can support it. But I think because I come from such a health background now, it kind of just sort of, I do like to sort of say, and you can probably vouch for this with the transition that you're going through at the moment, but it's like you're spending almost like your whole life for one day. Like you're dedicating your whole life for like one day and sacrificing so much of your health for just getting judged on your body and your physique. And I think for me, like, that's never really sat quite well with me. Do you notice now that you've got a much better relationship with your body and food?
100%. The last few months, and as I kind of already was beginning to feel that way, I started to feel that way, which is like why I officially made the transition. Because bodybuilding is a fucking weird thing. Like it is. Like, there's no arguing that. But now it's all about how I can move my body, like how doing new things with my body makes me feel like this big sense of achievement, but also the fact that my recovery isn't poor, my strength is good. I can work on my fitness. Bodybuilders aren't meant to run because it's not the right type of cardio. Like, all these imaginary rules. But the best thing is, when it comes to my relationship with food, is the fact that I look at food now like, what's going to nourish me today, or what do I want today? And there's no tracking, there's no worry about what I'm actually measuring. It's literally just like, some days I'll have a huge salad, some days it will be an oven pizza, but it's what I fancy, and more often than not it's the nutrient dense foods. I found my relationship with food, like, not that I think tracking's terrible, but for me, when I started focusing on purely the quality of what I was consuming alongside like the 10 to 15% of like the typical balance kind of stuff, I did find that like that was really the best point for me. And I think as well, like, you just kind of, I've always thought it must be exhausting to constantly be doing something. So you're never just maintaining a happy place. You're always either bulking or cutting. There's no just like, hey, let's just chill. I'm happy with how I look. I'm healthy. Let's just chill here, have a balanced life for a year. I mean, we could turn this into a whole different podcast. But
I think we've probably gone off topic.
I think it boils down to a lot of people who have bodybuilding as their life. It's their community. It's their sense of purpose. It's their everything. Whereas for us, our coaching, our businesses are one of our bigger parts of our identity, and it's what we love the most. And those things, it always somewhere where you've got to have equal portions of the pie at the end of the day. And if you've got bodybuilding draining you from all aspects in other areas of life, it's not sustainable.
Because I think bodybuilding is quite interesting because it does kind of intertwine a lot with, relationship with food, hormones, female cycle and things like that. And, whenever I've done the courses, I do normally get someone ask like, you know, how can we keep our cycle during prep? And I'm like, most likely you can't. There's nothing you can do, because the things that you are doing are always going to overpower like what we can maybe try and help with. So it's like, sure, you can take a few supplements, but you're still under eating and overtraining to get to that specific physique. So we can't counteract that with anything. There's nothing we can do. We just have to pick and choose, you know, which one do we want, really.
Yeah, and that cycles back to, you know, where we spoke about fat loss versus health and finding that balance to a certain extent. But then when you're prioritizing one way more over the other, you know, it is a complete imbalance.
Yeah.
So if I know that we could speak all day, but I think we're going to have to wrap it up. I think we got to give the studio back.
One more question before we finish up for fun.
Okay.
What's your toxic trait?
Toxic trait. Oh, God. Probably.
Millie's like, I've got 10.
Probably. I don't want to say overworking, because I think it's very, like, that's like someone saying overtraining, like how much do you need to overtrain? But I would say sometimes letting my boundaries slip because my sense of purpose overrides my boundaries and I want to keep working, you know, because I find it so fun.
Yeah.
What about yours?
Mine would be like my time management, to be honest with you, because the problem is, like, Sam, my boyfriend, gets so pissed off at me because he's like, how are you always so late? And I always think I've got time and I don't. So I'm always late. Like, even if I'm ready, I'm like, oh shit, I need to go back and get this. And I'm just always late. So even when I had a job that I had to go to, obviously now I don't have to worry about that as much, but I was always there either bang on the time that I started, whereas like the women that I worked with would be there 15 minutes before having a tea. I'd be like running in the door, or I'd be late. So that's definitely my toxic trait.
At least you weren't late for the podcast. It's fine. Where can people find you, Soph?
Instagram I'm mainly on. I'm not really tech savvy, to be honest. I'm not on YouTube or anything like that. So Sophie May Fitness on Instagram is my main gem.
Awesome. Everyone go and follow Soph for everything that you need to know about female health. And once again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Love you guys. Catch you in the next one.